It was the summer of 2005, and I was 12 years old. My parents were attending a high school reunion, and since they would be out late, they hired a babysitter for my little brother, Ethan, and me. Our usual sitter was unavailable, so they asked a neighbor, Mrs. Turner, if she knew anyone. Mrs. Turner recommended her niece, Lily, who had recently moved to our town. My parents met Lily and decided she seemed trustworthy enough. Lily arrived just before 6 p.m. She was a petite woman in her early 20s with shoulder-length brown hair and an easy smile. Ethan and I immediately took to her because she brought a bag of games and DVDs. My parents gave her the rundown of the house and our routines before leaving. "Be good for Lily," my mom said as she kissed us goodbye. We waved them off, eager to start our evening of fun. At first, everything was perfect. Lily made us dinner, spaghetti, our favorite, and we played board games in the living room. She was funny and engaging, and we were having a blast. After dinner, we settled in to watch a movie. Ethan chose an animated film, and we all snuggled on the couch with bowls of popcorn. It was during the movie that things started to feel off. Halfway through, Lily excused herself to use the bathroom. Ethan and I continued watching, but after 10 minutes, Lily hadn't returned. I paused the movie, feeling a bit uneasy. "Should I go check on her?" Ethan asked, his voice small. "I'll go," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. I walked down the hallway to the bathroom and knocked gently on the door. "Lily? Are you okay?" There was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time. "Lily?" Still nothing. My heart began to race as I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The bathroom was empty. Where could she be? I muttered to myself. I checked the other rooms downstairs, kitchen, dining room, even the pantry, but she was nowhere to be found. "Ethan," I called out as I returned to the living room, "I can't find her." Ethan looked worried. "What do we do?" "I guess we wait," I said, though I wasn't sure that was the right answer. We resumed the movie, but I couldn't focus. Every creak of the house made me jump, and I found myself glancing at the clock every few minutes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lily returned. She walked into the living room, her smile back in place as if nothing had happened. "Sorry about that, guys. I had to make a phone call," she said, taking her seat on the couch. "Where did you go?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just stepped outside for a bit," she replied, her tone casual. "Didn't want to disturb you." Something about her explanation didn't sit right with me, but I didn't push further. We finished the movie, and Lily suggested we get ready for bed. Ethan and I went upstairs to change into our pajamas. When we came back down, Lily had already set up the game of hide and seek she promised we could play before bed. "Who wants to hide first?" she asked, her smile never wavering. Ethan eagerly volunteered, and I counted while he and Lily hid. After I found them, it was my turn to hide. I chose the coat closet in the hallway. I nestled myself behind the hanging jackets, making sure my feet were tucked in and the door was slightly ajar so I could peek out. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear Ethan giggling as he looked for me, and Lily encouraging him. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet. The silence stretched on, and the air grew thick with tension. I held my breath, listening intently. A shadow passed by the gap in the door, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Something wasn't right. I waited for the sound of footsteps, but there was nothing. I counted to 10 in my head and then slowly pushed the closet door open. The hallway was empty. "Ethan?" I called out softly. "Lily?" No response. My stomach tightened with fear. I crept down the hallway, peeking into each room as I went. The house seemed darker, the shadows longer and more menacing. I reached the living room and found it empty, too. Panic began to set in. "Ethan!" I called out louder, my voice trembling. "Lily! Where are you?" I heard a faint noise coming from upstairs, Ethan's room. I raced up the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into his room. There, I found Ethan sitting on his bed, looking scared. "Lily said we're playing a new game," he whispered. "What game?" I asked, my voice shaking. "She said it's called Find the Ghost," Ethan replied. Just then, Lily appeared in the doorway, her smile now a twisted mockery of friendliness. "It's my favorite game," she said, her voice low and menacing. I grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him off the bed. "We're not playing anymore," I said, my voice firm. "We're going to our neighbor's house." Lily's smile faltered, and she stepped towards us. "You're not going anywhere," she hissed. I didn't wait to see what she would do next. I yanked Ethan and bolted down the stairs, Lily's footsteps pounding behind us. We ran out the front door and across the yard to Mrs. Turner's house. I banged on the door, shouting for help. Mrs. Turner opened the door, her eyes wide with surprise. "What's going on?" "Lily," I gasped, "she's not right." Mrs. Turner looked past us and saw Lily standing in our yard, her expression cold and unreadable. "Stay here," she said, stepping outside. She confronted Lily, and after a tense exchange, Lily finally left. Mrs. Turner called our parents and explained everything. When they came home, they were furious and frightened. They assured us that we would never see Lily again. I never found out what Lily's true intentions were that night. The memory of her twisted smile and the fear that gripped me still haunts my dreams. It was a lesson in trusting my instincts, even in the seemingly safe comfort of our own home. Camping with my family had always been a summer tradition. Every year, we would pack up our gear and head to a different national park, spending a week hiking, fishing, and enjoying the great outdoors. That particular summer, we decided to visit Blackwood Forest, a dense and isolated park known for its stunning scenery and abundant wildlife. I was 13, and the thought of exploring a new forest filled me with excitement. My younger brother, Gabriel, shared my enthusiasm, and we spent the days leading up to the trip planning all the things we wanted to do. Our parents promised us a full week of adventure, and we couldn't wait to get started. We arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon, the sun dipping low in the sky. The forest was thick with towering pines, their branches forming a canopy that cast deep shadows on the ground. As we set up our tents, I couldn't help but feel a slight unease. There was something about the forest that seemed darker, more foreboding than any place we'd camped before. That night, we sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. The flickering flames cast eerie shadows on the trees, and every rustle in the underbrush made me jump. My dad noticed my nervousness and laughed. "Just the sounds of the forest, buddy," he said. "Nothing to be afraid of." But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The next day, we set out on a hike to explore the forest. The trail was narrow and winding, leading us deeper into the woods. As we walked, I couldn't help but notice how quiet it was. The usual sounds of birds and insects were absent, leaving an almost oppressive silence. We stopped for lunch by a small creek, and while my parents prepared sandwiches, Gabriel and I decided to explore the area. We followed the creek upstream, marveling at the crystal-clear water and the smooth stones that lined the bed. As we rounded a bend, we saw something that made us freeze in our tracks. There, on the opposite bank, stood a figure. It was tall and gaunt, with long, unkempt hair and clothes that hung off its frame like rags. Its eyes were dark pits, and it stared at us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. For a moment, none of us moved. Then, without a word, the figure turned and disappeared into the forest. We ran back to our parents, breathless and terrified. My dad listened to our story, his brow furrowing with concern. "Probably just a drifter," he said, trying to reassure us. "Nothing to worry about." But I could see the worry in his eyes. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every sound seemed amplified, and I kept imagining the figure lurking just beyond the circle of light cast by our campfire. Around midnight, I finally drifted off, only to be woken by a sharp, frantic whisper. "Wake up!" I opened my eyes to see Gabriel standing over me, his face pale with fear. "There's someone outside," he whispered. I sat up and listened. At first, I heard nothing. Then, faintly, the sound of footsteps crunching on the forest floor. I peeked out of the tent, my heart pounding in my chest. There, just beyond the edge of the campsite, was the figure. It stood motionless, watching us. I shook my parents awake, and they quickly assessed the situation. My dad grabbed a flashlight and shone it towards the figure, but by the time the beam reached it, the figure was gone. "Pack up," my dad said, his voice tight with urgency. "We're leaving." We hurriedly gathered our things, the sense of urgency growing with each passing minute. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees pressing in from all sides. As we packed the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We drove through the night, the forest a dark tunnel around us. I kept looking out the back window, half expecting to see the figure running after us. But there was nothing but darkness. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, where we checked into a motel. As we sat in the room, exhausted and shaken, my dad called the park rangers to report what had happened. They assured us they would investigate, but I could tell they didn't believe us. The next morning, we headed back home, cutting our trip short. The experience left a mark on all of us, and we never returned to Blackwood Forest. Even now, years later, the memory of that figure haunts me. I've tried to rationalize what we saw, to convince myself that it was just a drifter or a trick of the light. But deep down, I know the truth. There was something in that forest, something dark and malevolent, watching us. And I can't shake the feeling that, even now, it's still out there, waiting for its next victim. Growing up in a quiet suburban neighborhood, I always felt safe. Our street was lined with modest houses, each with neatly trimmed lawns and friendly neighbors. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and kids played outside until the streetlights flickered on. But the summer I turned 11, everything changed. It started with small things, like the feeling of being watched. I would be playing catch with my best friend, Luke, in the front yard, and I'd suddenly feel a prickle on the back of my neck. I'd turn around, expecting to see someone, but there was never anyone there. I shrugged it off, blaming my overactive imagination. One evening, Luke and I decided to ride our bikes to the local park. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement. As we pedaled down the street, I glanced over my shoulder and saw a figure standing at the end of the block, just outside the glow of the streetlight. The person was tall and wore a dark hoodie, the hood pulled up to obscure his face. He was just standing there, watching us. "Luke, do you see that?" I asked, my voice wavering. Luke turned around and squinted into the distance. "Yeah, I see him. Probably just some kid messing around." We continued to the park, but I couldn't shake the unease that settled in my stomach. We played on the swings for a while, but my eyes kept drifting to the entrance of the park, expecting to see the figure appear. When it was time to head home, I was relieved to find the street empty. A few days later, I was home alone. My parents had gone out for dinner, and my older sister was at a friend's house. I decided to make some popcorn and watch a movie. As the microwave hummed, I glanced out the kitchen window and saw the figure standing across the street, partially hidden behind a tree. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching. I grabbed my phone and called Luke. "Hey, man, that creepy guy is outside my house," I whispered, trying not to panic. "Are you sure?" Luke asked, sounding skeptical. "Yes, I'm sure. He's just standing there, watching me. Lock all the doors and turn off the lights. I'm coming over." I did as Luke said, locking the front and back doors and turning off all the lights. The house was plunged into darkness, and I crept to the living room, peeking through the curtains. The figure was gone. Minutes felt like hours as I waited for Luke. When he finally arrived, we searched the entire house and yard but found nothing. My parents came home shortly after, and I told them what happened. They dismissed it as a prank and assured me that our neighborhood was safe. But the sightings continued. I would catch glimpses of the figure standing at the edge of my vision, always watching, always silent. Once, I saw him standing outside my bedroom window in the middle of the night. I screamed, and my parents rushed in, but by the time they looked, the figure was gone. My fear grew with each sighting, and I started avoiding going outside alone. I couldn't focus at school, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the watcher lurking in the shadows. My grades slipped, and my friends began to distance themselves, unable to understand my paranoia. One night, I woke to the sound of tapping on my window. I lay in bed, paralyzed with fear, as the tapping continued, insistent and rhythmic. Summoning all my courage, I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. The figure was there, closer than ever, his face inches from the glass. His eyes were dark pits, and his lips twisted into a sinister smile. I stumbled back, my heart racing, and grabbed my phone to call the police. The operator assured me that an officer was on the way, but the minutes dragged on like hours. The tapping stopped, and I dared to look out the window again. The figure was gone, but I could feel his presence lingering. The police arrived and searched the area but found no trace of the watcher. They told my parents that it was probably a prank, but I knew better. I could feel his eyes on me, even when I couldn't see him. Desperate for answers, I began researching local legends and unsolved crimes. I discovered that years ago, a man named Richard had lived in our neighborhood. He was known for watching children play, always standing at a distance, never interacting. One day, he disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a trail of rumors and fear. I realized that the figure watching me was Richard, or whatever was left of him. His ghost, his presence, something. He had chosen me as his next target, and there was nothing I could do to escape him. The sightings eventually stopped, but the fear never left me. Even now, as an adult, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow, every creak in the night, brings back the terror of that summer. I never told anyone about Richard, afraid they wouldn't believe me, afraid they would think I was crazy. But I know the truth. He's still out there, watching, waiting for his next victim. And all I can do is warn others to be vigilant, to trust their instincts, and to never let their guard down. Because you never know when the watcher might choose you. My childhood was mostly uneventful. But one night, an ordinary babysitting experience turned into something I'll never forget. I was 10 years old, and my parents were going out for their anniversary dinner. They hired a new babysitter, someone they had found through a friend. Her name was Lisa. She was a young woman in her early 20s, with long, dark hair and a kind smile. I remember feeling excited about having a new babysitter, especially since she seemed so nice. The evening started normally enough. My parents left, and Lisa made us dinner, macaroni and cheese, my favorite. We watched a movie, and then it was time for bed. As I brushed my teeth and got into my pajamas, Lisa tidied up the living room. Everything felt normal, safe even. But as the night went on, things began to change. After tucking me into bed, Lisa turned off the lights and wished me good night. The soft glow of my nightlight cast comforting shadows on the walls. I closed my eyes, expecting to drift off to sleep easily. But then, I heard it. A soft humming, almost like a lullaby, coming from downstairs. It was strange, but I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe Lisa was just singing to herself. As I lay there, the humming grew louder. It was a haunting melody, one I didn't recognize. I sat up in bed, my heart starting to race. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to see what Lisa was doing. I tiptoed down the stairs, careful not to make any noise. When I reached the living room, I saw Lisa sitting on the couch, facing away from me. She was still humming that eerie tune, her body swaying slightly. The television was off, and the room was dimly lit by the lamp on the side table. I called out to her softly, "Lisa?" She stopped humming and turned her head slowly to look at me. Her eyes were dark, almost hollow, and her smile was gone. "What are you doing up, sweetie?" she asked in a voice that sent chills down my spine. I heard you humming," I stammered. "Is everything okay?" She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Just go back to bed. It's late." Reluctantly, I turned and went back upstairs. As I climbed into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. The humming started again, but this time it was different. It was more like chanting, soft and rhythmic. I pulled the covers over my head, trying to block out the sound. But then, I heard footsteps on the stairs. They were slow and deliberate, each step echoing through the house. My bedroom door creaked open, and I peeked out from under the covers. Lisa stood in the doorway, her silhouette outlined by the hallway light. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked, her voice softer now. I nodded, too scared to speak. She stood there for a moment, then closed the door and left. The chanting stopped, and the house was silent once more. I didn't sleep at all that night, my mind racing with fear and confusion. The next morning, my parents returned home, and Lisa left without a word. I tried to tell my parents about what had happened, but they brushed it off as a bad dream. "Lisa is a wonderful babysitter," my mom said. "You're just not used to her yet." But I knew what I had experienced was real. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening around the house. Objects would move on their own, and I often felt like I was being watched. The atmosphere in the house changed, becoming tense and unsettling. One night, while my parents were out again, Lisa came over to babysit. I was terrified, but I didn't know how to express it. That evening, as we were watching a movie, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, and I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder. I screamed and turned around, but there was no one there. Lisa lit some candles and assured me it was just a power outage. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She suggested we play a game to pass the time, but her suggestion sent shivers down my spine. "Let's play hide and seek," she said, her smile returning. I didn't want to play, but I was too scared to refuse. I hid in my usual spot, behind the curtains in the living room. I could hear Lisa walking around, her footsteps soft on the carpet. "Ready or not, here I come," she called out in a sing-song voice. The minutes felt like hours as I crouched there, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, the curtains were yanked open, and Lisa stood there, her face inches from mine. Her eyes were different, darker than before. "Found you," she whispered. She grabbed my arm and pulled me out from my hiding spot. "I have a special game to show you," she said, leading me to the basement door. The basement was a place I rarely visited, dark and full of shadows. She grabbed a candle, and I reluctantly followed her down the stairs. In the dim light, I saw a makeshift altar in the corner of the basement, surrounded by candles. Symbols were drawn on the floor, and strange artifacts were scattered around. "This is where I do my rituals," she said, her voice low and eerie. "Would you like to join me?" I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "No, I want to go back upstairs." But Lisa's grip tightened. "You have to participate," she insisted. "It won't work otherwise." In that moment, I felt a surge of courage. I pulled away from her and ran up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I locked myself in my room, praying for my parents to come home. When they finally did, I told them everything. This time, they believed me. They called the police, but Lisa was long gone. She never came back, and we never saw her again. The events of that night haunted me for years. I often wondered what would have happened if I had stayed in that basement, if I had participated in her rituals. Our house remained tainted by the memories, and we eventually moved away, hoping to leave the darkness behind. But even now, I can still hear her voice in my nightmares, whispering, "Ready or not, here I come."